Welcome, everyone, to the Global Islamic Studies Center screening of Cairo Conspiracy, a 2022 film by Egyptian-Swedish filmmaker Tarik Saleh. We are so excited to have him here with us today to tell us a little bit about himself, about his film, about his filmmaking process. Welcome to you, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Shalia.
So we're just going to launch right in with asking you about what it means for you to be an Egyptian filmmaker and what your major film influences here are, because we have so many people in the audience who are just film buffs.
Yeah. No, so I'm half Swedish, half Egyptian. My father is Egyptian, my mother is Swedish. I was born in Stockholm, but I was from very early age obsessed with my Egyptian background and started going back early. And then I moved back to Egypt, went to university there, and of course fell in love with Egyptian cinema and Egyptian television,
Right.
and film overall. So yeah, so my background, my father is a filmmaker, I'm gonna admit. So, but he's a stop motion animator. So I grew up in a film studio. So
Right.
it's not like totally shocking that I turned into a filmmaker myself.
Well, what do you think of as your genre, since your dad was stop motion animation? And this
Well,
film might be a thriller, or and your previous film is, some people describe it, the Niall Hilton incident, as noir, detective film. What's your genre?
yeah, I'm absolutely a film noir guy. And I'm a genre filmmaker for sure. I mean, I think that, in Europe especially, genre has become a sort of a word for bad films, but
Yeah.
really all the masterpieces are genre films. If you think about it, The Godfather, for example, it's a genre film. For me, noir is definitely always there. Noir is, of course, an existential genre. It's always, the enemy is always the guy you see in the
Right.
mirror rather than someone on the outside, which is to me very fascinating. And it lends itself very well to Middle Eastern stories, and
Uh-huh.
in particular Egyptian stories. I mean, you cannot, if you've been in Cairo and if you've been in Alexandria, like it's noir. It's really noir. It has that sort of forbidden smell and taste. There is a spiritual meaning too to the film, where I am sort of I love these Egyptian folkloric myths that I think most Egyptians love, is that this idea of the little guy who sort of changes history. And uh, I was sort of intending on telling a story like that,
Hmm.
or even talking about the angel Gabriel as he appears in Hadith, where he shows up sort of dressed in white and teaches people religion, or teaches even the prophet the religion. I think those stories are, to me, very moving and interesting and deep.
Yeah. Yeah, so let's link that then to this particular film. And let me ask you what your interest in Al-Azhar is, and in particular, why you picked the relationship between Al-Azhar and the Egyptian state as the subject of perhaps what you're calling an interest in noir.
Yes. I mean, it started very simple with that. When I was a kid, I'm old. I'm 51 years old, so
Oh,
I'm
wow.
not so young anymore. Yeah, no, but I'm not as young as I wish I was. But when I grew up, I I fell in love with this book, In the Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco, which
Mhm.
is a detective story that takes place in a monastery, right? And for me, that book, when I read it when I was a teenager, it was sort of it was like a Harry Potter for my
Uh,
generation, because there was no Harry Potter
there
at the
was
time.
there. Yeah, there was.
Yeah. So then I revisited it like 6, 7 years ago, and I realized like how deep and profound that book is. It's an investigation of the powers within a religion and how these monks sort of keep the secret, and and so I started to play with like the idea, what if I did that? And I was like, you cannot do it. You cannot do it. It's so dangerous, right? But then I was like, if I did it, it would definitely take place in Al-Azhar, right? And the thing, I have this relationship with Al-Azhar because my grandfather went there, and I've always had a fascination for the institution, and always, I mean, it's one of the great institutions, both
Of the world.
historically and
Yeah.
of the world. I mean, it also has actually a connection to cinema. Ibn Haytham, he wrote the books about the camera lens. He wrote that around the year 1000 at Al-Azhar. I mean, without him,
It's
we would
interesting.
not know
Right.
the concept of even how an image is created through optics. And of course, that was at the height of Al-Azhar, where, all the great thinkers were there and everything. But the history of Al-Azhar is just so rich and so, I mean, it's a thriller in itself. And I mean, when you had Salahuddin taking Egypt and turning Al-Azhar into a Sunni institution from a Shia institution, it had this rich history. So I was playing with a lot of concepts early on about secrets hidden there and so on. But then at one point I just said to myself, no, let's just tell a straight story about, and I sort of started to think about a sort of a parallel reality, because the film is totally fictional. I want to say that, because a lot of people, especially Western audiences, they go like, what is real? What is real? And I'm like, calm down, guys. It's a movie. It's a fictional movie. But I think that because they didn't know that Al-Azhar existed,
Right.
it becomes almost like this sort of shock to them, And so I remember the first American journalists that interviewed me, they were like almost attacking me, like, what is real in this film? And I'm like, do you ask that about Star Wars? What is real? Does Darth Vader exist? And of course, I play with a place that exists. But really, I mean, Sheikh Al-Azhar, of course, is, the reality is, of course, the opposite on what you're about to see in the film, because in reality, Sheikh Al-Azhar Tayyib, he was there when El-Sisi became president. He was already there. So it was the opposite. El-Sisi had to sort of state his power against Sheikh Al-Azhar. So everyone probably remembers, who knows something about politics in Egypt, that when right after El-Sisi was elected as president in Egypt, he went to Al-Azhar on the Prophet's birthday and held this speech where he basically said, either you're part of the solution or you're the part of the problem,
Right.
And that was sort of the beginning of a very strained relationship between Al-Azhar and Sisi. And when I wrote the script, I must say, I did not think of that relationship and how that was going to develop to a more and more toxic relationship. Al-Azhar have always been very smart about staying out of sort of confrontation with the leader of Egypt. But lately it's been becoming more difficult. And part of that is that El-Sisi have pharaonic ambitions,
I was interested when I saw, first of all, my mouth dropped open when I realized this was a film about Al-Azhar. I was like, I can't believe you actually
Yes.
did it.
Almost mine too. I was like, did someone do a film about Al-Azhar? Who's crazy enough? Who did that? And I was like,
went
oh,
online.
me.
I was like, I went online and I was like, is there a fatwa yet? from Al-Azhar. And there was not, in fact, the Al-Azhar spokesman simply said, we have not seen the film and we cannot comment.
Sure.
But,
They cannot say. I mean, they've probably seen it. I mean, piracy is so big in Egypt, but it's hard to allow. But I will say this, that I think the reaction I've gotten this far from the Muslim community has been very, very, very good. It's more a political issue.
Right.
Because, I mean, as a Muslim, you're not used to seeing films that are nuanced, or even Arabic films sort of are attacking religious people. And I think that's something, because we are living in a time where religion is used for political purposes. So it represents things that it doesn't necessarily have to be on a personal level. And I think, I mean, the film is about that, right? But I think just the fact that everyone in the film is a believer. Right. I mean, there are no atheists in the film. There is no other side, And I think that's what sort of, to me, was interesting. I had very early drafts. I had an atheist in it.
And what happened to the atheist?
I felt like the point was, it was more interesting to have everyone in the story being a believer, because it becomes much more sort of interesting in how to deal with, like, whose side is God on, in this fight. And ultimately, for someone who's a true believer, of course, if you really trust in God, and I think that is the debate between Adam and Sheikh Nigm in the most crucial scene, is whether you're allowed to change destiny or not as a Muslim, which is sort of the big philosophical question
of not just Islam, but yes.
No, of course, and that's one of the most fascinating aspects, is that in secular philosophy, that has become sort of the big major question, right? So, I mean, I think that is sort of the existential question. Can we change our destiny? And I mean, I heard a debate between 4 secular philosophers, and all of them were in agreement that no, you can't. You cannot change your destiny. It's like, and they were even discussing, they were saying, like, as they had studied it, they had just come to the conclusion that every morning, on a personal level, they wake up and say that they can, because it would feel meaningless otherwise. But on the greater scheme of things, taking DNA into consideration, taking all the big factors, I think we as human beings, as soon as something big happens, whether it's COVID or, something big that we cannot control, we just all of a sudden realize that all this flexing with our arms is sort of like, or even, I mean, the thing that happens, the butterfly effect, that we intend something and we work really hard, and then the outcome becomes something that we didn't expect it to become. And I'm not a great philosopher or thinker or even like a religious scholar, but I found it to be, to me, very interesting to have people sort of trying to control something, an institution that is a religious institution, in a religion that says that God, you have to surrender to God, and God decides your destiny. I thought that contradiction was very interesting.
Right. We have to hold that paradox somehow in our heads, right? Relatedly, what is one does not necessarily intend an audience for a film, but what was your idea of who the audience would have been for this film?
Myself, and myself as a young guy, I must say. Like, I was thinking of myself as a teenager walking into a cinema, seeing a complex film. When I, as a young man, I was like, I was a very, devout, practicing Muslim. And for me, there was really nothing. I mean, I saw The Message maybe 100 times, with Anthony
The
Quinn
one,
as
so
blackface,
that's terrible.
and then and then Malcolm X came, which was,
Right.
of course, important film, Spike Lee's film, but ultimately there was no real sort of which really challenge you on a sort of a spiritual level. So I saw myself as an audience, but what was so beautiful, both in France and in Sweden, I traveled a lot with the film, but where it had huge cinema audiences, it was 550,000 admissions in France, over 100,000 in Sweden in the cinemas, and it was such a diverse audience. So when I went out on these sort of opening sort of things where you just saw, like, senior citizens, who are sort of like, you saw the sort of on the always sort of in the back of the cinema, you see a group of veiled women, and then you see like, it was such a beautiful experience in that way. And always the religious people always came out to me after the film. They didn't participate in the Q&A, and they come up and sort of ask, like, that surah, why did you choose that surah, why did you choose that
Yeah, yeah.
hadith? And it was very, very beautiful. Just that conversation to me made it worth it, because people are shouting and people are yelling, and especially now when we see how we have failed. I mean, I must mention, like, we sit here today and we have failed. I mean, really failed the children of Gaza, in the sense that now they are suffering, for things that, yeah, we can talk about people that want to fight, but we also can talk about complicity and what we have not done. You know
Right.
what I mean? And where, there is, if you can sort of lower the temperature and start to look each other in the eyes and have a discussion about important issues and about existential questions, it becomes much more interesting. And I think art can do that. I want to believe that art can do that.
Right, especially in your engagement with both religion and politics, which is
Yeah.
unusual, you know. So tell us about the process of making this film, casting it, filming it, especially because, it was filmed in Istanbul.
Yeah. So that was actually very fascinating. I knew, because I was thrown out of Egypt when I did my last film. I think it's called the Nile Hilton incident in America, I think. And I was thrown out 3 days before I was going to start to shoot, and I have not been able to return after that. So this time I knew that I was going to make the film not in Egypt, and there were two candidates. It was Morocco and there was Istanbul. And because of COVID, Morocco closed down. We were going to build Al-Azhar,
Mm.
and it was going to be very expensive. Um, and so we went to Istanbul, and it was great because I could shoot at the Soleimani Mosque, which is one of the great architectural masterpieces in Islam. And I remember I was walking into the mosque together with my crew and my production designer and my visual effects supervisor, and they were saying to me, like, Tarik, don't worry, we'll turn this into Al-Azhar in post. And I was standing there just admiring this incredible architecture, and I said, no, 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 we're not changing it. We're not changing it. This is our version of Al-Azhar. This
Mhm.
is this is our fantasy about what it is, not what it is in real life.
Interesting, right.
And one thing about casting, there were two things. I knew that I was going to cast a lot of Palestinians, and there are two reasons for that. Palestine has some of the greatest actors in the region. They are really good and great. So a lot of the people I love, that I've sort of admired, I wanted to cast in the film. and also they are fearless. They have nothing to lose. They don't give a shit. I mean, really. I mean, to put it clear, I mean, they don't care if, you know, whatever people have to say, because they have already been let down, sort of. So that was really good for me, because I needed fearless actors who was going to just sort of grab this story by its like throat, you know. And I'd like to mention especially Taufik Barhoum, who plays Adam. He is Palestinian who moves around a lot, but I had seen him in a few things, and I offered him the part without test screening.
Okay.
And he was insisting. He wanted to do a test screening.
Right.
He was sort of begging me, please, Tarik, can I do a test screening? I said, no, it's your part. And part of that was that I wanted him to be chosen, and I wanted his and mine relationship to sort of be the relationship of Ibrahim and Adam, so that he would sort of feel like I have been chosen to this path, and question constantly whether he was right for it or not.
What do you think our audiences in the Middle East and North Africa want to see? One thing that struck me, many things struck me about what you're saying, but one thing that struck me is the difference between people who would speak up in the Q&A and the religious people who are coming up to you afterwards. What do you think that audience in the MENA region wants to see?
Oh yeah, it's a great question. Of course, we have our local heroes, you know, the Muhammad Ramadans and the Adil Imams of, you know, which I love, by the way. I mean, I'm not like, I indulge in like Muhammad Ramadan. I love it. But of course, that's escapism, right?
Yeah.
At its sort of core. And I think that people can't get enough of that. So that they definitely want to see that. I don't think they want to see El Ikhtiyar, you know, the series about El Sisi like as a superhero. I think that's the army producing television that no one wants to see. But I think that the films I do, they are a different breed of film. Like I don't think that, I think it's a little uncomfortable for Egyptians to watch that film. And I understand why, because the film is not shot in Cairo. Right. The actors are not Egyptians. So there is something uncanny about it. But I will say that my top dream is to one day shoot with Egyptian actors in Egypt. And what is great with Cairo Conspiracy, because when I made that film, I just wanted to make a sort of a universal story taking place at this very particular place. And when it opened in Cannes, in the main competition, I felt like I had reached that goal, right?
Congratulations.
All of a sudden, yes, no, but it was a huge surprise to me, but it was also like, yes, this is exactly how I saw this film as an international film. And that's why it feels really good that you're showing the film now in the US to an audience that is probably kind of diverse.
Very. Yeah. I mean, it's amazingly local, it's deeply local, but also translatable it's translatable in a human way, and also a political way to anyone, I think. So the festival that it's in is Halaloween, which is technically a Muslim horror film festival.
I love it.
we interpret this very widely, right? So, you know, films that are thrillers, films that are, you know, kind of noir, films that are dark in some kind of way. I wanted to ask you if you think that there are any similarities across cultures and regions for, you know, when we think about, you know, horror films that might come from the Muslim world and horror films from anywhere else, or thrillers from anywhere. Or are these thrillers or films, you know, are they just so deeply cultural and specific in terms of like what makes people scared and what people, you know, what people have fear around? Are they
It's a
universal?
good, it's a great question. It's a great question. You know, it's a spy thriller, terror conspiracy, but it's also a coming of age story. It's also the pain of like, you know, becoming something else than your father, and your father trying to sort of let you do that. I think my favorite scene is still the scene when the father says to him, I know about the letter. Your brother read it to me, and I can't stop you from going
Mhm.
because God wants you to go. And it's like, it's you got that from your mother, and it's this contains this sort of sorrow, and I for me, it's deeply human. And so genre, I mean, I don't answer your question, but I think fear is local in many ways. Hell in our country is fire, right?
Right.
Because it's very hot. So we can sort of like, we go like, oh no, it's hot. It's hot there. No, I don't want to go. Where it's, of course, here in Sweden, hell is cold,
Uh-huh.
because people fear cold. So, I mean, yeah, I guess fear is very local, um, and but it's also universal, and the concept of jinn, for example,
Right.
and things like that. I I mean, there is a side of me that would love to go deeper into a genre space in Egypt, because I mean, there are such great opportunities for horror and for genre.
Mhm. Um, what do you, well, okay, since you're talking so much about your favorite genres and your favorite filmmakers, tell me who's your all-time favorite filmmaker and your all-time favorite film, if you can pin it down.
Oh, that's a difficult one. It's very, very difficult. I mean, favorite film stands between Battle of Algiers and I come back to the Godfather Part Two, which is also this perfect masterpiece. Um, when it comes to filmmakers, I, Hitchcock probably, um, you know, but I also love Billy Wilder. I also love these sort of old school, you know, directors, and Kurosawa, of course.
Mm.
So, I mean, Kurosawa's High and Low is one of my favorite films, but like, um, and then when it comes to regional, it's difficult. I mean, I don't want to mention. I mean, it's more like I love Ebony Man, like all Egyptians do. I have this. I mean, as soon as I see him, there's some sort of comfort spreading in my body, where it's like, we just his eyebrows up and his staring eyes. I go like, I just smile. I also love Ahmed Zaki, of course. Um, and I adore Mohammed Ramadan. I think he's very charming. Um, he's doing some weird stuff with the rap and everything, but I but I still like him.
I know, me too. He was here he was
Wow,
here
no
in
way.
Michigan a couple of months ago, and I and some Egyptian friends went to see him. It was a spectacle, like a sold out spectacle.
Oh my
Because
God, I can
future,
imagine.
so you have all of these favorite directors from old Egyptian film. What about what do you see as the future of Egyptian filmmaking? New Egyptian films, filmmakers. What's the future?
I mean, I see a bright future, even though it's a struggle right now with sort of um, censorship and stuff like that. It's difficult. As a film director and as a filmmaker, it's your job to defend the story, and your only alliance is with the audience. It's never with the studio, it's never with the money or the power or the politicians. It's always with the audience. Tell the truth to the audience. And so I see a bright future, and I also see, I mean, there's a great movement among women, and that of course is where, you know, there was this amazing TV series in Egypt about a woman prison right after the revolution that I loved. I thought it was great. And when I was going to shoot in Egypt, I could just see that there was a lot of women directors coming up. So hopefully that will also happen.
So last question, tell us about all of the exciting themes and concepts that you're
Oh
working
yeah, I'm shooting a new film next year, and it's absolutely a genre film. It's absolutely taking place in Cairo, in the underbelly of Cairo. And I can tell you that this time I am going to touch something that it's even more holy than Al-Azhar.
Oh.
Yes. And if anyone can figure out what's more holy than Al-Azhar in Egypt, I mean, you'll see. But I mean, this time it's like, I'm going to the place you're not supposed to go.
Oh my.
And it's gonna be, yeah, it's gonna be super fascinating and interesting. I'm super excited. And I've had it's a spectacle. It's a big movie in a sense that it's a bit bigger than Al-Azhar or than Boy from Heaven in terms of scope. So it's gonna take, I mean, if Boy from Heaven had like about 3,000 extras, this has about 8,000. So it's in a different scale. It's sort of the, you know,
It's epic.
Cecile DeMille, yeah, Cecile DeMille, the last commandments, you know, it's like, oh no, you know.
That sounds awesome. And I think now our audience will just be plagued by wondering which place, what? But for
Where can't you
Halaloween,
go?
yes. I mean,
Yes.
for us, a Halaloween, I'm just putting out there that we would like to pre-book your film before it is made.
Oh, please, please, please have me, and I'll come, and I'll come, and
For sure.
I'll sit in the audience and see the other great films you have there. And I mean, I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful Halloween.
Thanks. So thank you so much to filmmaker of Cairo Conspiracy, director Tarik Saleh, for visiting with us, and we hope you enjoy the film.
Thanks.